Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our conversation.
Oh, see, I cut you off again.
I'm sorry.
Happy Tuesday.
And good morning. And
voice is back.
Good morning. Happy Tuesday.
Sorry. Bumpy start today. All right, we'll just jump right in there. So just for everyone who's listening, this is a pre-recorded episode. We have done this one ahead of time. People are traveling. It's summertime, so we're doing a little bit of breaks here in the U.S., and some people are moving around. So we're taking a bit of a break, and we're pre-recording a couple episodes. So this will be a pre-recorded episode, and our main topic for today, I don't think we have any other major announcements we want to tackle here, but our main topic for today will be atomic report and model development from an article written by SQL BI and coming out of our favorite Power BI developer, Kurt Bueller. We talk about him all the time on the podcast. We should get Kurt on here one time just to say hello. We need a little. We need a little Kurt cardboard cutout we can bring him up and have him introduced to the podcast.
I'd make an exception for Kurt. normally we have a bunch of rules, but we like data.
When you get as many episodes as you have around his content, come on. So Kurt goes through a really great article, and the description of the article or the link to the article will be down in the description of the video below. So if you want to go check that out, this is an interesting article, and what SQL BI is communicating here seems to follow a lot of the patterns that come from SQL BI. So this is very interesting where they're going with this, and very intrigued to see where they're going to take this idea of atomic report model development and design. Any openers? Do we have any news, anything that came out that was interesting since we talked last?
I feel like we covered a ton in our last episode. We went through maybe all of them.
There was a blog announcement, the July update for Power BI Desktop. There's a lot of little things that are coming out. I haven't played with every little feature that came out there, so I know there's still probably things that we missed that are good, but I don't think there's anything worth talking about yet. All right. That being said, let's jump into the article. I'm going to quickly go through just a little bit of idea here. There's a YouTube video, and an article write-up that goes through this. And basically, it's talking about atomic design. Have you guys heard of atomic design before? Has that been a phrase that you've... It sounds like this is a common pattern. I'll say that. Yes? No?
I don't know by the name, but by other names, like the design pattern itself is... reminding me of like object-oriented programming, right? Where you're reusing things. So
component-based programming.
Yeah. So like right out of the gate, I guess atomic design methodology from a UI UX perspective comes from like Brad Frost. And Kurt puts a link into some of the original kind of ideas behind that, and on a basic level, Kurt does a fantastic summarizing that in a little visual right up front in the article. But essentially, the Brad Frost kind of description of things aligns with that as well.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about, so there's this concept. I mean, designing things using the atomic design method. It's a play on biology, basically, right? It's talking about, everything is made up of atoms. And so if you just rearrange the atoms in a certain way, you get different results. And so here we have the known world all built out of atoms. Another book that I'm reading right now that has really impacted me in general has been the book called Atomic Habits. Very similar concept, breaking things down to the most granular actions that you can do. And the concept being many things you want to achieve in life aren't made up of really big leaps and bounds in progress. It's actually made up of very long-running, consistent, small steps that you do. And I'm trying to unpack that book, and it's blowing my mind. If you haven't read Atomic Habits book, it's like a bestseller. It is really fundamentally changing, and it hits on so many parts of the human behavior. What people behave like. It's just incredible. Yeah. So really, really enjoy that. That's another really good book. I'd highly recommend it. But this sounds very familiar. Break things down to the most essential pieces, and then start from the very small elements and kind of stack them together. And then once you've built them up, now you have this comprehensive, complete design of something. And so I like this. This is a really interesting concept. I like where they're going with this one.
Yeah, it I'm gonna go down the rabbit hole a little segue, but yeah, I mean, Atomic Habits. I don't know if I've read it, but it strikes me in the human behaviors realm, and it was always shocking, or somewhat irritating, right? We all like to think that we're extremely unique, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your world is your world, right?
Yes.
We're all individuals. But as it turns out, in terms of like human behavior, right? How can they cognitively like bucket us into like these behaviors or thought patterns or so? Well, that's because like a large portion of humanity like has the same types of behaviors or constructs that you can break down into psychology and different things like that. So it strikes me as this isn't a unique concept that just only applies here. In many ways, it also is fantastic for problem solving
Mm-hmm.
because big complex problems, whether that's business or personal life, and especially in the personal life realm, right, hit harder because there's a lot of emotion
Mm-hmm.
tied to them. And
Yes.
it's really important to be able to dissect them down into the digestible pieces
Yes.
or things that you can action on, right? And
Yes.
I think that's what's the best part about like thinking about the end products, right? In the same way, like how do you build these things? It's all just different pieces, right? So the layout of this atomic structure starts with the atom, right? Which is basically just a core building block. It's a thing. And I think even in I don't know if it's object oriented programming, but it's like there's a function, right? There's some you build something that does something simple.
Mm-hmm.
And the molecule, right? Like the second layer of this theory is essentially assembling these atoms together. Like
Yes.
they're the core building blocks. So they're in some respects like a widget, right? You combined a few of these things and it performs this action in some way.
Mm-hmm.
If you combined other atoms in another way, like it would do this thing. And all of a sudden, because you have these core things and then these groupings that do other things, now you have a bunch of things that do things. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about products now or if you're talking about something else now, like they still perform the same actions, which makes
Yes.
for scalable programming,
Yes.
right? So then ultimately he lays out the other three, which is organisms, functional units together that make up a complete solution, right? Templates, conceptual layout that consists of different units put together, and then pages are multiple layouts filled with representative content. So we'll talk about each layers of these, but I think the structures are really sound, obviously, because they're so
Resonates with
applicable to
us.
many different aspects of life. But yeah, it's I like the structure and the thought behind applying it here.
Okay, I'm gonna take you went on a rabbit trail for the human
did
psyche.
a little bit.
You
Yeah.
did, but you've triggered another thought, and I have to. I'm going to indulge the thought, and then we'll come back. Okay, so second rabbit trail. I know this is a rabbit trail. I'm self-aware a little bit. Your concept around you cannot predict any one individual person's or behaviors, but you can predict the masses of behaviors. Like when you talk about a lot of people grouping together, you can more accurately predict what's going on. This really speaks to Isaac Asimov's book or book series around The Foundation. Have you guys read that or watched the series on Apple TV?
A long time ago, I think.
I feel like Seth, you've read this one. I feel like you're a much better reader than I am. So I have not read it. I have watched some of the series on. It's probably, and again, the TV series from Apple is probably way different than the books. I don't know. I can't speak to it. Not educated. Sorry, don't know what's going on there. But I've talked about this with my dad a couple of times because he's read them and he's an avid reader on this stuff and the science fiction and things. And it was very interesting. You cannot predict any one person, but as you continually collect more and more people together, you can now predict the direction of what things may happen in large masses, and it's much more predictive. It's like statistics, right?
Yeah.
If you roll one die, you won't be able to know what it is, but if you roll it 1,000 times, you can have a very nice distribution of like what it will roll to. So those kind of things that are very interesting. It's like applying statistics and maths to this, which is fun. Anyways, that was my other diversion of thought there. Let's bring it back into report design and elements.
We went psychology to sociology there.
Maybe? I don't know. I don't know all the ologies. Well, this article is talking about biology, so we'll start. We'll keep going. Oh boy. Anyways, so what are your thoughts? I mean, do you like the analogy of going into, so if we talk about objects, patterns, visuals, page templates, and report templates, right? Do you like this ascending version of collection of things, measures being the basis for object, or measures and columns basically, right? That's the basis. And then you identify patterns, which again, we know that exists from a Marco Russo standpoint, because SQL BI is all about DAX patterns. They've built their entire recent career around training and master DAX works. I mean, it's all of these patterns that appear over and over again, which is nice because you don't see these patterns unless you've had a lot of time reviewing and testing. And like, to me, patterns are harder to pick out just because you need a lot of runtime on patterns to know what really is. Does it exist? Is it something you can solve? And you can, this is, I think, a challenge for new DAX users. You can solve the concurrency problem 3 or 4 different ways, but what is the most efficient way? What happens when the data gets really big and have lots of rows? Does your pattern still hold true to those really large patterns of what you're doing? What do you think?
I think.
Go ahead, because I have something not as positive, I think, as you're going to have to say.
Oh, okay. So I think to your point, Mike, the pattern part is one of the more complex aspects of tabular like modeling in DAX.
Yes.
And I think it separates the novice or not like light practicing user,
yes,
to the practice professional, right? Because you can lose this as well, right? Yep. In comparing the two, one is kind of fumbling around door, like in a maze of doors, right? It's like, oh yeah, these are my 3 options. Let's look at this door. I got this to work. I'm going to walk through it. Yep. Right. Versus others that understand a pattern, what doors to open, what doors to avoid, in certain situations, because they're developing a framework, right, of calculations based on what is the most efficient. And a lot of that comes out of SQL BI, right? Like, like guys who know their stuff, guys or gals, like a lot of them come out of these patterns of really good practices that have been learned over lifetimes, where Marco and Alberto, this is what they do. This is their jam, right? Yep. Like, and to share that in the way that they do has really enhanced, I think, a lot of models that are out there.
I've grown from it.
Professionals, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I've been so committed to learning what they teach to send my team of people to their advanced training in DAX. And like, we learn a lot. So
because
again,
it makes such a difference.
It makes such a difference. And you think about things, you look at models you build 5 years ago, 2 years ago, and not many people can speak about models they built 5 years ago, because some people haven't been around that long to do this, but like, Power BI has only been out for 9 years. Go back 5 years, look at your models, and you're like, man, what was I doing? Like, I've learned so much. I have so much more knowledge around what's going on here. And one thing I think is a detriment to companies, I think companies overestimate how unique they think their data is. And I think if you start stepping back, and this is the same thing I found when I went through Delta training as well. There's this, market share analysis that we were doing, and we were talking a lot about position and direction, highly impacted my career as far as data and analytics. But a lot of companies think that they have to reinvent the wheel every time. And to be honest, you don't need to. There's a lot of things, a lot of standards or things that exist that are already known, and you just need to reuse the pattern. So, sometimes I feel like we try to make these really custom solutions that are really our edge, and what are we really doing with our data things? And we're so unique, and we don't have it. You're in an industry, you're very similar to somebody else. And so what can you learn from the whole phrase, there's nothing new under the sun, I think really resonates for me in this area. Maybe we need to just do a little bit more research to figure out, okay, what can we do? And I think these patterns area is a great place for people to sit down and do some research, because I think patterns really inform the table structure or the design structure of your model as well. Because I feel like the patterns are You have sales and it has to fit this way with these kinds of tables. Or here's how we do a currency exchange, the from and the to. There's actually an example that Kurt does in the video here where he talks about using Tabular Editor to build out some of these patterns inside his model. I really liked the hook in this article around using existing tools to help produce this stuff. Like Tabular Editor makes total sense. This is really good.
I want to make sure that as we go through today that we look at this holistically as per the article, because I think it's going to be very easy for us to take a look at just the development side of things and how naturally you have the dependencies, how naturally we're already since kind of creating that framework. But this article is talking about this whole atomic structure from data to individual titles in a visual and how they're all interconnected. And I want to just make this point because this is where I think personally I'm having a disconnect. Yes, everything that we do with data model and the dependencies on those tables, that's almost a technical argument because that's always going to follow those rules. I can't not connect to that table in order to get this the required columns, right? Or you're going to get an error or bug. But this atomic structure is really talking about also everything that goes past the measure itself, everything after and since the after the data, from the individual visuals tied to those particular data sets or those data points.
Okay.
This is where I'm feeling a little bit of separation because as of today, I don't have the ability. I can create a template. I can create a theme.
Okay.
But the level of granular detail, I think some of it that's laid out here, I think that it becomes a lot more free form where it can't really follow an atomic structure. It can follow a pattern. It can follow a basic template, so to speak. But to the granularity that was outlined, I want to get your thoughts on that more, especially from the design side. Because again, we're not just talking about the data patterns that we're doing and how we already have, in a sense, automation around that. When this happens, this always happens. Once we go to the report design side, we no longer have any of those guardrails.
Well, I think let me say it this way. I think we have a very well-known, I think the objects themselves, the measures that we're building, are very well known. I think we realize and understand that those things are supposed to build upon each other. There's interdependent measures that are going to stack, and those make sense. Those patterns, I think, are very well defined, and they're very consistent. And there's actually, to your point, Tommy, I think there's really good tooling to help you build that. That's where Tabular Editor, I think, really shines. And Kurt shows us in the video that I really love, and it's a pattern that I have used a number of times, is when you're starting a model from scratch, you have 7 columns, 8 columns. In his example, he has 10 columns. He selects all 10 columns and says, I'm going to build a measure, a sum, on top of each of these columns, and I'm going to hide all the old columns, and I'll put all the measures in a new folder. So basically linking them all together, and there is a reusable pattern of, when we talk about best practices, that follows one of our patterns. Make measures, not columns. Put the measures in a folder, organize it by the logical grouping that the users would understand. That's the pattern. And so we have tooling to support that. Where I think you're getting some grief, Tommy, is there is this interesting play around, okay, well, what measures, what things should I be dropping onto the visual? Because that's more of an unknown. It could be there's more variety in solutions around that part. Then when you get over to like the other side of that realm, which is, okay, we know what the style, like the title should be centered. It should have this color pattern. Like those are other, let's call them patterns that we have decided to build and establish. And Desktop does a good job around giving some of those patterns. I'd also argue, and this is one of the things I don't like about this article, is they're missing a very heavy feature in here. There's no talk of themes, Power BI report themes. There's no talk of a theme generator. There's no talk of template generation tools. So, I mean, while they call out very clearly at the bottom of the article, hey, we're doing this amazing thing, and hey, we have Tabular Editor and Deck and Bravo to do a lot of these core things. I think they miss a lot of the other base tools. And again, this is their article, this is their company. They're probably pointing to the tools that they're most involved with. But why not shout out other tools? There's other tools out here that are doing a lot of what they're describing in this article as well. I think they're doing a disservice by not pointing out some other things in the community that are also helping out with this. But to go back to your comment, Tommy, there's some of the visual styled things can be brought in as a pattern. It's the mismatch between the measures and what's on the visual.
Exactly.
And I think what I'm going to say here is I still think the concept exists to be able to bind random measures to a visual and have the visual style a certain way. I really do like what Kurt said in the article, and he talked a little bit around, if I want this card visual to look this way, I need to be able to build, I mean, if you think about the styling or the card or where it needs to sit on the page, all the measures that make up that card, they should just be variables at this point. And I think what you're finding, Tommy, is there's no tooling today that takes a collection of visuals from one report and can easily swap it out to a different report, because as Kurt specifies in the video, they're in desktop. The tool itself, the tool we're talking about, when we copy visuals from a template file into an actual file that we're working on, there is no replace columns, there's no replace measures on top of that. So the tooling, the concept exists, the tooling does not. And so that's where maybe you're going is, the mental disconnect for you is there's no equivalent tooling to actually accomplish this final pattern. Does that make sense?
No, you're completely spot on, because I may have a great pattern building layouts and themes.
Yes.
And I have a great pattern building data models and dependent measures, but they are not in this connected at all in terms of.
They are. It's just there's
really.
just no. They are. I think they're 100% are. Like, you should be able to. And I think this is a miss from Microsoft, honestly, right? Or there's not a tool to yet to do it, right? What you should be able to do is you should be able to copy a visual over from one report to another. What should happen is when you land the visual, it should come up with a dialog box, or if it has the measure that it needs, it should just drop it in, happy, move on, right? But what should happen is you should copy the visual in, and what it should say is, look, these measures are missing. Can you please help me map them to measures you already have in the model? And you just pick. Those are the new measures. Boom, visual gets added. To me, that's a miss from desktop.
Yeah.
If you're allowing a copy paste of an object from one report to another, you should understand that you're already going to a different report.
Yeah.
Right. So the
100%.
A dialogue and or the things that are going to fix all of the properties of that visual should be front and center, right? Or like surfaced in such a way that it's easily like updatable. And I do agree in that visuals layer that the implementation is still janky, right? Like, but I don't think it discounts from the standpoint that if you think about UI UX development, right? If I have a Figma that shows me the many different ways I can present a card, and with an icon on it, or up down showing whatever, if I have 10 different examples of that, and that's what I'm showing to a business user and saying, hey, okay, so we've got all of these calculations, right? We know what the requirements for the report are. We know what answers we're trying to drive at. It's a matter of design and or what we want to represent in this visual. And I also have that already created. That saves a ton of time.
Yes.
Right. So yes, is it jinky that I have to like copy and paste the object? Yeah. But at the same time, like if it's in the format, properties are set, all that kind of stuff, and all I'm doing is taking that object and putting it in my new report, that's what I think this article represents, which is reuse things as opposed to every single time you're building a report,
build the new things,
start from scratch.
Yes, exactly.
So, what's funny is, Mike, as you were explaining what you wish Microsoft had in terms of from the copy visual, I took that a different way when I was reading this article. And again, This may be pie in the sky, but to me, this is what I've wanted for years. And hopefully when the new metrics feature comes out, if I'm adding a measure to my report, right now we have the formula, we have a description, we have obviously the logic.
Sure.
But why couldn't there be to kind of the atomic approach, other metadata that would automatically get filled into a visual? because that's one thing, and this is where my disconnect is we can have teams reusing measures, but they may use a different title. They're free to choose any title they want or any descriptive information they want. Everyone's probably using a different color or what have you from a visual layout point of view of certain measures. What I would love is having certain attributes on that measure. And when I add this to the report, it either adds that to my description page or it adds the appropriate title or subtitle, because that becomes that more holistic approach, especially when Kurt was talking about the titles and subtitles in here, because how they're all connected. Well, they're not, because I still have to manually write my own everything in Power BI. The only thing is the data itself. But
this is really interesting, Tommy, that you're telling me this. So let me.
Yeah. And I think I'm on to something.
Well, you're blowing my mind a little bit here to some degree, right? I mean, so to answer your question directly, is there a way for you to be able to add additional metadata to a measure to help it figure out what thing it should be on? Yes, the answer is yes. It's called annotations. Annotations exist. It's a key value pair. You say what the name of it is, and then you describe what the output of it is on the annotation. So everything gets annotations, columns, measures, tables, the whole things. Annotations are what Bravo uses to signal to Bravo, hey, this date table was added by Bravo, and therefore these measures can automatically be bound to those columns with a holistic pattern. So what SQL BI is already doing in the objects and patterns side of things is they're saying we're going to make objects that we know exist, and therefore we'll track them, and then we'll give you these based on the existing objects you've added or you've already defined in the model. And then we're going to give you a whole bunch of measures that also can be added to that as well. Extending that thought further, using AI, using other assumptions here. If you just look at the PBIP format, and I think this is another area that is now opening up a whole new realm of things, where if you now open up the PBIP format, it's now a very known structured JSON thing. And so now you can expose this to large language models or generative things and start saying, generate me a report. And then you could also scour all your existing reports with that PBIP format and go into them and look at all the items and say, which measures are most commonly used on these types of charts? What categories are most commonly used across your models? And potentially from that, based on your descriptions, based on the annotations, based on the things that you're having, I think you need some level of like, sorry, too many thoughts are happening at once. It's all colliding. You need something that is able to read what's going on there and kind of push the annotations back into that data. So that way, when new report pages or new things are built on top of those objects, those fundamental patterns or fundamental measures, the visuals can be more easily created, right? So to your point, the sum of sales is something that would make sense to have it on a bar chart or a line chart, but depending on what it would combine with, right? So maybe what should be happening here is the AI should go through and look at your model and provide recommended annotations on things. And then based on those annotations, you can then stub out most of a report. And then that can give you like a baseline of where things are coming from. This is amazing. This is a really neat idea you're unpacking right now.
I didn't want to go too far because I didn't want to just say pie in the sky stuff, but no, you're kind of right with the PBIP right now. There's a lot.
Opens a huge world of this.
There's a lot of better ways, and I don't even think you need AI to do this.
Yes, you do. Everything needs AI, Tommy.
Well, I mean, yeah.
When I walk down the street, if I'm just taking a walk outside, I need AI to help me do that. I can't do anything without an AI anywhere.
You at least need a prompt.
Exactly. We should at least be prompting things. Yes, which means we need AI.
Yeah.
This is true.
I can't even answer an email without AI. I mean, Microsoft has told us you are nothing without AI. That is where we're at right now, Tommy.
Do you want AI to summarize what you just wrote?
Yes, I need AI to help me build my coffee in the morning. The AI tells me how many pumps of caramel to put into my coffee just because I need the AI to do that. I'm stupid without AI.
AI helps us actually go through a ton of articles on a given week too.
Tommy's not even real. Actually, Tommy is made up from an AI. Tommy is not even here. Tommy has been doing other things. He's actually vacationing in Hawaii for the last 6 months. He doesn't even exist on the podcast.
He has a local model. It runs off his Windows machine.
We've auto-generated Tommy. He's not even real.
You could probably anyway. There's enough. Yeah, let's incorporate some basic LLM in here where there's
Yep.
not even a user interface, right? We don't have to say it's Copilot for Power BI. It doesn't have to be that. It could be some basic actions that occur, like to your point, Mike, when certain elements exist or are shown to kind of go through a certain workflow. This is where we really have this atomic approach, because just like Power BI is also, hopefully, I haven't heard anything about it, the metrics feature that they demoed at the Fabric conference, they're elevated. To me, this is just an elevation of the metric. So there should be a lot more tied to this. Anyways, I think that's a bit of a rabbit hole. The short thing of where I'm going with this is we have a ton of atomic approaches that are seamless and almost required with the data development side of things, because you have requirements and dependencies. Oh, you don't have access to this, or you didn't incorporate that column, it's not going to work. But we go into
why can't
right.
that stuff be pattern driven, right? Why can't I ask questions? To your point, Tommy, like the business is going to ask questions of this, right? It's not the idea of having AI do things for you isn't necessarily to give you the answer, but maybe it's also, maybe what should be used here is the AI should tell you what's missing, what's not here, right? So if you think about the vacuum of things you can't build, Tommy, to your point, there's no date table in this. You should have a date table. Like you can't ask these questions unless you have this, right?
Yeah, and or make sure to include certain descriptions in your dang titles when you use this measure.
Yeah. And then it should recommend, here's what I think these descriptions mean. Can you please review it? Does this look good to you? Like that, right. That's the stuff where I think we could use a lot of these patterns to help us build, like, but it should be able to evaluate, right? These patterns have inputs and the patterns have outputs in all of these items. A measure, the pattern of objects, the SQL BI. Why is that not used as a way of evaluating your model? There's the DAX optimizer, I think that's another tool from SQL BI where they're using, again, they're evaluating your model for patterns and saying, when I see this kind of pattern, a calculate wrapped in something here, and this is going to be slow. You're not using treat as, you're using this other pattern that you could use to, it knows already based on historical usage of what DAX measures have been doing, this is a slow pattern. That same thing could be used everywhere else here too.
Yeah. I think what's interesting to me is the more we're talking, we've got, and I think Kurt says this in the article as well, right? There are tools for objects and patterns. There are tools that we're expressing that are not expressed in the article for page templates and report templates. It's one that we love, obviously, is our own, where we're developing an experience that most business intelligence folks are just concerned about the data, right? And business users automatically can get value out of in terms of like helping them structure the page, make it look great looking. The visuals part, though, where we're talking about, I think in a lot of respects, if somebody solves that tool problem specific to data, whether it's AI generated or like tool generated, is it drives home the conversation right from the start. Right? So if we think about requirements gathering, questions we're trying to answer, if I have a pattern that I have the visual objects based on a whole series of objects and patterns of data, right? Now when I'm in that conversation, how much of that is actually net new? Right? With a business user, it's like, hey, like, how often are you having this? So describe to me, what it is you're trying to track. Well, what's really important for us is we need to see the number of cases that were generated over, the last month or whatever, or et cetera, et cetera. It's like, oh, okay, well, we're looking at a line chart. We have a time element, and then we have whatever the thing is, right? Mm-hmm. So how repeatable is that visual in the realm of all the things? Well, it's very repeatable. So if I'm just going through this conversation and I have a library of visuals that also correlate back to patterns and objects and things that I need to go construct that, how much like at the end of that conversation, if I have all of this framework to build something, how much of that is net new versus just like plug and play with the data points and making sure the data types are there?
That's a
Right?
killer
Like
point.
that's a very interesting like thought around the process of like when we're doing discovery, when we're doing the interaction with the business. And to your point earlier, Mike, businesses may think their data is so wildly different, but it's not. It's the
Yes.
same. It's the same what in every business. We see as consultants, you see the same patterns.
Does it start with an O? I assume does
It's
it
the
start
same
with an
pattern.
A?
The same patterns.
Yeah.
Is it slightly different data? Did somebody muck up the source systems exponentially? Yes, possible.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, there's a lot of similarity in the same things that they can use. And as Power BI is growing here with the different formats, PBIP, PBIR, PBIT, right? Like, and the developer tools, I think what this article does is it opens like it's a refresher to like, hey hardcore BI devs, right, of the Power BI ecosystem, hey practitioners that are developing a lot of solutions all the time. We're now in this realm where maybe we should be thinking about this in a object oriented framework, or in this framework of repeatable objects that we can reuse. And hey, in the future, if somebody solves number 3, I mean, I can reading the tea leaves, I wonder who, but like it's like kind of the that piece is missing in this architecture of like, hey, how, if we're going to develop this whole end-to-end process, we've got 4 out of the 5 pieces in different various parts of a tool. But I think that is very compelling, because that would definitely drive a lot of ease into just almost Figma like plug and play. Oh, we want this object. This is what it's going to look like. Here, grab that. That's what makes the most sense. By the way, we've already constructed, a page template, right, that has these visuals that produce sales by, region. And here are the most important things that we found across the 5 customers we've been interacting with, yada, yada. And they're like, yeah, I love that. Like, give it to me. Okay, print, right? Plug it. And then all you would need to do on the back end is, prior to object, define what the configuration for data coming in is.
Yes. And Seth, you're spot on here with all of this. Honestly, like looking at the article, and again, I would argue the tooling exists on the very small atomic size. It's easy to build tooling there. It's easy to build tooling on the other side, the very complete items. Here's all the pages. Here's all the visuals. Here's all the components that make up the complete solution. What's missing right now is the tooling that exists to map the measures into the visuals and produce that as, a complete product on the page. So that's the one thing that I see is missing in this, is the tooling does not exist to get from patterns through visuals into page templates yet.
Right.
But we're really close to someone's going to figure this out and start producing this, which means then we have complete tooling. And then the question will be is who's going to create the complete tool that starts from objects and builds all the way through to report templates? Because we've been doing, I'm very proud to say, I think we were probably one of the first innovators around report templates. And we started very early with theme generation. That was where we started because that's all Power BI Desktop gave us. And as soon as PBIP format showed up, we're immediately building, report templates, page templates, all the templating things. We just don't have the data added to it. We're tackling the problem from the report templates back into the visual side. So we wanted to make it this easy. So you just pick the visual, drop in the measures, and that's where the human's involved because that's not automated yet.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see just in general, whether it's SQL BI or other like other organizations or people, right? Part of the community that lock into that realm to try to solve a problem, because it would be a complex problem too. Like how in theory, it's very easy to say like, yeah, okay, I have this visual object and it ties to these patterns object, but like how many different variations of things would break in there, right? Can I go back and just configure something that aligns to all my objects and it's as easy as I describe it to be? Well, I mean, we all know you'd have to do complete data validation. You're not doing it like, as opposed to when you're developing these things, you're incrementally validating that all the checks and balances are tying out. And I suppose you wouldn't have to do that if you concretely knew some of the core objects would always produce the correct results, but there's a lot of ambiguity in DAX too, right? Like in a lot of those things that you're creating. So like double validation, like, are you creating more work for yourself by trying to do a standard, or does the standard get you 70% of the way there and then you always have the 30% custom? Well, how does that work with visuals and not breaking them or not having all the objects within them to go backwards? You know what I'm saying? So like, in theory, hey, yeah, it'd be a perfect world, but maybe AI fills in the other 30%. I don't
know. Man, I guess I keep thinking about like this. I'm getting hung up on a lot of this visuals and page template pieces. None of this exists today. It just doesn't exist. Like what I mean by that is you need a definition of a visual, and then you need to have, these are the measures that this visual would expect, or these are the it's not even the measure name. The measure name is almost irrelevant in this conversation. It's more about, what does this visual show? What's this, like, what are we trying to accomplish with that? And then inject into that is, okay, these are the input properties. These are the inputs required to build said visual. Doesn't matter what those are. Those could be bound to anything that's in the model. So like it's this very abstract version of, like, to your point, it's building object-oriented programming. It's an object that is now a visual. The visual gets some input parameters into it, and the output is this pattern. How you style it, how you change the title, like those are remedial things, but like that's just changing the styled side, and that's something that's already built into tools today.
So what is also interesting to me is like page template and report template kind of divert, I think, a little bit in their description of like how we would view that. Like if I'm building a theme, right, or a templatized theme look and feel, right, it can include visual objects, but it doesn't include the data itself.
Correct.
To some degree, I wonder if this approach and this view of the world is too sanitized. You know what I'm saying? And if you know Marco and Alberto's content in Kurt, it is very structured. It 100% makes sense, and there's a reason why they're the foremost experts in DAX. However, I think some of their ideas butt up against real world business scenarios and the ugliness that exists within Power BI from yes, it's not a perfect semantic model. Yes, people build stuff that is way wrong, but it's still very useful. And I like in the page and report template, it definitely reads like there's a perfect structured way to do this. We're going to deploy it in this fashion. We're going to build these page and report templates, and then the output of this is what everybody would use. And that's not the case.
I agree.
Somebody's want to customize it, right? So what happens when I have to customize it? What if I want to build a different visual? What if I want to do something that isn't necessarily part of a template? Do I have does that break the construct completely, or is that an acceptable like diversion? Or and that conflict back and forth will be interesting if a complete solution is the byproduct of all this, or if this was just hey, like we have this methodology by which we go build things.
It's interesting you say that, because I look at the objects and the patterns. Those two items that SQL BI has developed are very sanitized. These are the patterns. This is how you follow it. This is the measure that they build, because they're able to test various patterns and say, this is the best pattern to use in these situations or these kinds of situations. And I feel like that is a very interesting, your observation on 4 and 5, section 4 page templates and 5 report templates. Maybe there's a bit more of a human factor on there, that it wants to style it their way, get more of that creativity into that design model.
But we know that
you're going to have to look at all the reports, Mike, to get the average.
Right?
If you're going to do that, you can't look at one individual. So
What do you mean? I'm not sure I follow your comment
I was
there.
trying to make a tie back to the beginning to talk about you can find out what they're all doing. I know how all the reports are looked at if you don't look at any of them.
You can't ever look at one report and know what's going on. You have to look at the collection of the sum of all reports, and then you'll know how to build things.
There's a lot of pie charts.
Well, I mean, what feedback is missing in this, right? So to your point there, Tommy, like they're all pie charts. What if that? To me, at the end of the day, it's whether or not these reports deliver value to people. It's at the end of the day, it's whether or not these reports can give people the information they need and do their job. So if we don't have some sort of feedback loop on, if we're trying to auto-generate these things, if we're trying to this is why the report design process exists, to your point, Seth, right? You get a first swing at it. Here it is. The faster I can get to the first swing or the first product, I can then spend more time. Okay, here you go, business. Look at it. Check it out. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's not what you wanted? Okay, let's talk about what was missing here. What did we not quite get right? And then add to that report a couple other visuals. Maybe it's another page. Maybe it's some other things in it. So, I mean, this is not to your point, I think earlier what you're alluding to is this is not a one and done. This is not a formula I can follow and just get done. I think there is needing to be some iterative processing and building on top of this, but there is common patterns that could be applied here. And I think about what I get very not bent about, but what I have trouble with is the collection of knowledge of all the people on YouTube showing you how to build. Like one guy I love is Boz. Boz is doing an amazing job of like, here's how to build this amazing visual. Click all these buttons. On one hand, I love learning it. On the other hand, I'm going, I don't want to spend a lot of time clicking these buttons every single time I want this visual to look this way. Like I want it to be like, this is what I want the visual to look like. Keep it, save it, hang on to it. Like, I mean, I think about all these really neat people.
I did a great thing. Yes. Save all my work.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I think there's no good medium by which really good designers, and this is what we said, Seth, in the past with report design. There's going to be a handful of really awesome report designers who are going to make stunning, incredible looking reports. The largest part of the community is not going to have the time or the skills to get to that level all the time. So what we need to take the smartest people that are building the best looking visual, thought out design things and package them and give them out and distribute them as easily as we can. That's the value of, spending time at doing those really intricate one visual design things, because now you can just reuse it. This is the same thing with Deneb. This is why Deneb galleries of things are amazing. Like, it's great. There's a spec that defines the visual, styles and all. Like, that's awesome. That's very easy to repeat and replace. And to be honest, what Deneb has done is what Power BI should be doing. Not the visual as code, but when you take a Deneb template and load it into your model, it knows you're bringing a new Deneb template to your model, and it knows if the measure exists, I replace it with what is already there. If the measure does not exist, it says, wait a minute, I can't find this measure. Please go find me a new one to replace this value. And there's a description of it. This measure should be a categorical value of something that is against this numerical value. Like you can tell the user how to build the visual. That's what you want. That is the experience. That's the part that solves this problem. Sorry, I'm getting really excited about this. Anyways, anything else you want to? I think we're getting close on time here. Do you want to start wrapping and get some final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think we touched on maybe a paragraph overall of the article in terms of what else it describes, but I think that really goes to show, I think, us and really where our conversation went. I mean, that my quick recap is going to be on, and I think this whole episode felt like a hot take. So we'll pause there because I don't know if I want to go any hotter than what we're at now.
We're already on fire.
We're already boiling.
Okay.
But I just want to. My hot take is look back the main items that we discussed today, and it was really kind of a consensus, more or less a consensus, or excuse me, an agreement. That my Porky Pig moment around. Hey, we love all the tooling out there. We have a great workflow with Power BI. We have a great workflow with design. But if we're going to do this, we got to do it holistically. And we've all talked about that and what our dream is. And I think that goes to show for the three of us going on this call. These are things that we are dealing with because we know that I can have the best development design process in the world, but at the end of the day, the end user doesn't care about that. How are they going to trust that? Connecting this and really streamlining this. We're looking forward to what this brings.
My final thought is I disagree with you. I think we did a pretty comprehensive overview of the entire article, but that
Love it.
I guess is subjective. But I think what this reinforces and outlines is having a process is going to help you regardless in anything to speed up the next time you have to do it. And this is an approach that if you invest the time in a well thought out, methodical way to build reusable things, the next time you have to go build the thing, it's a lot faster. The next time you have to reference something, it's a lot faster.
Yep.
And there's always value in that because then you scale up yourself and the work you can create and the impact you can make in an organization, as opposed to believing that you have to start from scratch every single time. And when you start to think in those pattern ways, your architectures and the way you build reports and all of those things start to change and become much more reusable and more valuable to the organization. So it's definitely worthwhile to dive in here, maybe even further and deeper, look at some of the different tools, the different formats that you might not be familiar with in the Power BI ecosystem, and start to familiarize yourself, because I think as the tool matures, especially in the Fabric ecosystem, and with all of these other methods by which third parties can integrate with that ecosystem, et cetera, I think we solve this problem in the next few years, where a lot of the conversation points that are potential pain points today are part of a process or part of a tooling tool sets, that make it a methodology that we, consistently reuse, and it fits into a Fabric ecosystem where, hey, the way we used to do things is now faster. In the same way with report builds and the things, hey, the way we used to do things is now way faster because we've solved a lot of these pain points across the methodology.
I agree with that, Seth. I think, and again, Tommy, to your point there around earlier, I think a lot of the article does go through a lot of explaining how to do a lot of these atomic habits and how to use tools to build that. So, I think the main part of the meat of the article here is the top portion. I think when we covered that very well, I don't think we really need to go into like how to click the buttons, and a lot of that latter part of the article is around that. So I do feel like we've covered a lot of this. What I'm excited about is there is some fundamental concepts here that are not yet being addressed by either the community or have not been addressed by the tools that have been made today. I'm looking forward to seeing where that completes the full circle and things become more relevant in that broader ecosystem. How does that tooling continue to mature over time? I would really, if I had to be pointed about this one, I really wish Microsoft would pay attention to this article. And this might be part of the reason why SQL BI is doing it, because Microsoft's not paying attention here. But if you could give us some very simple ease of use features around copying visuals from one model to another, where you will give me a minimum, a dialog box of these columns, these measures do not exist, and allowing that to be more of a transferable item or object, I think that would be very beneficial to the Power BI product and tool. So something has to be there. Or imagine clicking on visuals in existing reports and saying, make a template, right click, make template about it. And it gives you a little bit of information about how you make this a template. And then it becomes part of your library that you have in Power BI. To me, there's something very powerful with that. And that, to be honest, that would be a major speed improvement on many reports, being able to make your own visuals that are templates, themes that are templates, and then being able to reuse those objects anywhere you want on any report, which makes a lot of sense. So anyways, I think there's something there. There's an idea there that needs to be refined. Maybe we'll be able to produce it and figure it out at some point, but you never know. We'll see who kind of comes out with it. You heard it here first. So we're claiming it now. We're just claiming it now. When the idea comes out and there's a tool that does this, we're like, this is the idea initiated from this article and from this podcast. So, whatever day this thing comes out on, we're going to mark my words. In a year from now, we're going to have a tool that does exactly what we described here on this
Cannot
podcast.
wait.
Cannot wait. And then we'll finally have Tommy come back and we'll get rid of his large language model.
Yeah,
it could just be simple too, right? Just replace with, measure, replace with, because like have 100%. All of the understanding of how that measure is used in the visual. Just be replaced. Right? It doesn't have to be simplify it. It doesn't have to be every single property, all the different places, all the configuration. Just replace this with this, this with this, this with this. It works.
The definition of the measure is now an easy object we can extract in JSON form directly from the model. And if you have a PBIP format, we know exactly where to go get the single object that is the visual, that is the JSON. It's readable. It's prime for a tool. So let's see what I can get my developers to start working on today. We'll see.
Thanks, guys. Weekend. So
thank you so much. We really appreciate your ears on this one. This is a great article. Highly recommend this read. Really trying to unpack the way to speed up your development. This is really good. Love the article. Very well written. Thank you, Kurt, again, for producing such a great work of art and thought-provoking art article. I'm not a deep thinker, but this one helps me really think through what's the next thing and how to make things amazing here. So really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple and Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps out a ton. If you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode, head over to powerbi.tips/podcast, leave your name and a great question. Finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all of powerbi.tips social media channels.
Excellent. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.